We continue now looking at our practicalities more this session of what it means to have a home fellowship or a smaller grouping that get together around certain basic spiritual principles. Now, let's look at a certain little biblical thing that it's easy to pass over unless you actually take the time to notice it. In Mark chapter 3, verse 14, it lets us know that Jesus chose 12 apostles, and he ordained them to be with him. He appointed 12, designating them apostles, that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach. Let's sort of put a title up here for our session and call it The Home Group. And put a big A under here. And Jesus in Mark 3:14 chose 12 to be with him. With him. Now those are significant words. You may just pass it by and say, okay, so he chose 12 to be with him. But let's talk about that. Why did he choose 12? Have you ever stopped to ask that question? Why 12? Why, he could have chosen 3,000, and that would have been impressive as they marched on a village. But he chose 12. But one of the clues, I think, is because he chose them to be with him. My grandfather was a farmer-rancher. And it dawned on me once that I meet more people in 1 year than he met in his lifetime. Maybe I meet more in a month than he met in his lifetime. But I cannot successfully relate to any more people than he did. I am a human being. I operate out of the same principles and with the same limitations that he did. And though I meet many, many more, I cannot successfully be in relationship with any more than he did. Well, what are the limitations of successful relationship? Those who study these sorts of things did a study some years ago and found out that the optimum size group for good relationships over a long-term basis is 12 to 14. Now, it makes me wonder, did Jesus know something? Because with the 12 apostles in him, where does he fall? Right smack dab in the middle of this. Now, here's another thing that I've discovered. I have been in many, many living rooms around the world. I have been in big living rooms. I've been in tiny living rooms. I have owned several houses. I have discovered, we might just put this as a B, and people can wonder, what does that mean? I've discovered that the average living room, every living room that I have had and every living room I have been in, has space for 12 to 14 to sit comfortably. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Jesus said, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you." Then he goes on and says, "By this shall all men know you're my disciples, if you have love one to another. That's scary. That's scary. Because then I begin to ask the question, okay, let's bring this to modern time. How would anyone know by observation? Because, see, Jesus authorizes observation there. How would anyone know by observation, based on my lifestyle today, that I really love the brothers? How would they know? How would they know? There's just no real way. Because we have ourselves locked into the theater style without realizing that the place where we really learn to love each other is in a smaller group where we can get to know each other. And the average living room holds about 12 to 14. The early church grew. How? By great campaigns? No. Neighborhood after neighborhood, house after house. Paul makes the statement, he says, I did not cease to go house to house, teaching you. Some have used that as rationale for knocking on doors evangelism, and that's fine. I don't want to argue with that. Except what Paul was saying is, I made sure I visited the whole church. He said, I went to every church, in other words, every house, going house to house to house to house, so that he could meet with all of the people who were members of the church and teach them, you see. Well, the thing is, if this is, and in a way this is, see, this is, as I've mentioned to you in one of our little talks before we really went on camera, this is not my favorite sort of setting for this kind of teaching or for the small group concept to be shared. Because you are actually a shrunk theater. See? In fact, actually, I have taught people the concept, or I've mentioned that home groups are where it's at, and I've had people say, well, we tried that, Erwin, and it didn't work. And I said, well, describe how you tried it. And you know what I found out? They hadn't actually tried what I'm teaching you. They had taken the large theater and shrunk it to a small one and called it a home group. See? But it had the same dynamics. It had to have the same professionalism. It had to have the same, you sit there and spectate while I do the action up here, that went on in the bigger thing, see? And it's death. It means it just doesn't work. But in the typical living room, here's what happens. You have to sit in a circle, don't you? Something like that, at least. Interesting things go on now that do not go on in this kind of situation. For instance, here, as alert as you are, you can still fool me. You can be sitting there and, nodding at the right time. And and actually be 1,000 miles away fishing somewhere or the like. I know, I've sat where you sit most of my life, and I know how to fool the professor too. See? Because the simple fact is, I can't talk as fast as you can think. I can't deliver concepts as quickly as you can manage them in your mind and run with them and so forth. And after a while, you're off somewhere else and so forth. Which is why, one of the reasons why, people go to sleep in churches. I mean, they're sitting out there with nothing to do. Things aren't happening as quick as they're thinking. So finally they just kind of peek out and nod off. Which, well, praise the Lord, that it's peaceful enough for them to sleep. But also, when you are in a gathering that is the large theater type, it's a hard thing remembering everybody's name, you know? You ever hear the statement, I just don't know anybody? Man, so many people, but it's like I'm lost. And it's true. It's true. Because sometimes people are threatened by crowds anyway. And sometimes they're kind of lost in their thoughts, and for someone to even, necessarily lost in their thoughts. And for someone to come up and stick a hand out as a protrusion into their life that they're trying to deal with at that particular moment, ah! So there is a place, though, where everybody is a participant and no one is a spectator. There is a place where everyone knows everyone's name and is known by everyone else. Maybe I should start making a list here. 1, participation. They know names. There is a place, well, suppose in your typical church gathering, a time comes for prayer. How large do you have to be before you can't really pray for everybody? Before you just have to deal with just a very small handful of the direst emergencies? Or generalized prayer, Why don't we pray for those who need jobs today or something of that nature? And there really isn't the time. It's not that that's bad. Thank God we can at least do that. But there really isn't the time for every part of the body to pray and be prayed for. Well, there is a place where everyone can pray. There is a place where everyone can be prayed for. Now, this is why I called my small groups my miracle times, because God answers prayer. And I think one of the reasons that we don't see more miracles, there just isn't that much miracle praying going on, There isn't that much agreeing with one another. And by the way, this concept of agreeing or harmonizing isn't just a handshake. I'll agree with you on that prayer. But it means that we have taken the time that I've learned to know you and to love you, and that answer to your prayer means so much to me that I can harmonize with you. Let's see. And when that happens, you start seeing amazing stuff. It's almost like, oh boy, another miracle. How many are we going to have this week? This is also a place where everyone can serve and be served. In the large gathering, in the theater style, if someone says, boy, I really want to be involved, maybe he's a new Christian or something. Well, you have to start thinking, well, let me see, what do we need? We got janitors. Well, let me see. Now we got people to move the chairs that day. Oh, boy, just finding a place for everyone to serve is hard to do because we think building rather than body. But there are a lot of ways for service to occur out there that can only occur in settings where everyone can have the opportunity because they know what the needs are. And because we are people of need, we also have the opportunity for us to be served also. And that's the way the body operates, you see. But here's another thing that makes this so incredible. Do you realize that home groups don't require much financial outlay? You ever thought about that? So let's just say it's cheap. Because, if you recall that profound thought that I've shared with you, wherever there are people, there are homes. Now, how important this is, let me give you an example. Suppose we say, I believe God's called me to start a church, Manhattan, New York City. So, suppose, remember the list that we had in our first session? all this stuff. We first got to have property, all right? Well, now, we got a little bit of a problem here. When you start talking property in downtown New York City, you got a job on your hands, don't you? Who's going to bankroll that? So right there, well, I'm defeated. I guess God didn't really want me to start a church there. However, wherever there are people, you'll find homes. You'll find homes. Here's another thing that is a problem of the theater style. Let's say that you invite someone to go to your church. Now, that means he has to leave his neighborhood to go wherever it is. And he's going to want to know several things. Just what kind of church is this? You know. And that will eliminate a lot of people if they find out. Then they're going to want to know what kind of people come there. Now, if you invite someone who, boy, all he owns is the jeans he's got on, and he comes and we're dressed fit to kill, what's he going to think? I don't think this is my place. There are all kinds of things that go into the theater style that we don't even think of as the effect that they have. Let's suppose that it's the typical church building. Now, when I say that, you have a concept that pops into your mind, don't you? When I say typical church building, you know. The typical church building is not a warehouse. But the typical church building, immediately you think, oh yes, I mean like a steeple and stained glass windows and sort of a colonial style, you know, all that sort, white and what? Big front doors, yes, and something out front that advertises and sometimes has silly sayings on it. The moment we choose a style, do you realize that we immediately then separate some people who will come and some who won't? Then we choose a name. That separates some who will come and some who won't. We choose a neighborhood. That separates some who will come and some who won't. And all of the decisions that go into the theater style means that we have, by its very nature, eliminated a lot of people. Until you can eliminate just about everybody. And some have. And some have. But what if you invite someone to your home? None of that goes with that, does it? The home lacks all of those eliminators. All of those stereotypes fall apart when you're just saying, hey, I live next door to you. I'm just right down the street, 3 houses. Why don't you come? We have this gathering, just some people that love each other, and we study the Bible together and just have some good time. Would you like to come? Well, what's the name of your home? What denomination is your home? You don't ask, how do they dress in your home, or things like that. Do you have stained glass windows in your home, But you see, none of these stereotypes exist in the home, which is why even though you cannot afford to go into some neighborhoods and buy property, you can always go into any neighborhood if there's a home. And they can't resist that. I mean, you can just seed down a neighborhood. Oh, let me tell you another little interesting story. There are times when really having a church building is about the worst thing you can do in some countries. Let's put it this way. In some countries, having a piece of property and putting up a Christian church building in that country is like, back when it was such a big problem, the Communist Party coming over and building their headquarters in our neighborhood. See what I mean? They built that in our neighborhood. And immediately you start planning arson. And we get all upset in some countries where they burn down the only church in that country. And I'll be honest with you, I'm going, thank you, Jesus. It'll drive it back to the homes. Because it can just like leaven take over, see? But you can't build that many church buildings. You can't build them as fast as they can burn them down in some countries. Well, do you see what's happening that is such an advantage in this setting that isn't occurring in the other setting? Let me just say another thing here that makes this so powerful, and that is, this is the only setting that I know of where true accountability and discipline can occur. And it occurs naturally. See, I have to confess to you that as a pastor, I'm a coward. I find it almost impossible to discipline people, you know. I usually wait until it hits the newspapers. Then I better do something, I guess, you know. But it's because that's an artificial, it's such an unreal way of actually dealing with it, because true discipline only comes out of relationships anyway. Now, here is how accountability and discipline occurs in a group like this. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but when you ask for prayer, you're really doing some confessing. You realize that? When you say, I need prayer, you're confessing something about inadequacies on your own part. Now, there are various stages of that. It could just be as simple as Aunt Susie has an ingrown toenail, which means that I can't help him, but so we need prayer. You know. But actually, every form of prayer, every prayer request is a form of confession, because you're confessing a need, you're confessing an inadequacy, and you need someone else to help you by praying. But whenever in a small group I ask you to pray for me, I have also authorized you to ask me next week, how is it going? Do I still need to pray, or is this conquered? So let's say that I say to you in our prayer time, you know, I'm just having real problems with my thought life, and I don't like what's happening. Would you pray for me? Well, next week, what you going to do? How's your thought life? You know, is this prayer being answered, or is this still a problem we need to pray for? You know, and I have found that sometimes they'll say, "Oh, thank God, I've really been delivered." And others say, "Keep praying." You know, but they know too that they're going to be asked. See? Well, another thing that happens when we say that this is a place where you know, actually it's more than names. You know and are known. It's not just that you know people, but they know you. Look at this. I live in a neighborhood that actually has a lot of Christians in it. It's interesting to me because I see the symbols on their cars, and I see them sometimes kind of heading for church, and I know, boy, we got a lot of Christians in our neighborhood. I don't know any of them. Isn't that amazing? We fan out and go by one church after another to finally land where we're actually going to go to church. And maybe we sit there, nobody knows us, we've come from a great distance, but we're in America. This is a place where you can drive and go anywhere you want. You can go 100 miles to church if you want to. And you sit there, nobody knows you. And you leave and nobody knows you still. They haven't asked you how you living. They haven't said, what can we do to pray for you? You haven't asked them that either. And so we're living in a day and age in the United States because of our incredible mobility and our prosperity that we don't have to be known by anybody. We can experience the church experience for years and be alone. Not even in our neighborhood will anybody know. Well, that isn't true, or wasn't true, and still isn't in some locations, in the early church, because you couldn't go on foot by that many churches, if you please, to go to the church of your choice 100 miles away. But whatever happened had to happen in your neighborhood, among people who knew you and whom you knew. And it was a whole different dynamic when that occurred. We've had one or two, shall we say, oil crises here in the U.S. I'm not sure they were oil crises, but we had them anyway, where the price of fuel went up exorbitantly high and suddenly became incredibly unavailable, which I'm not sure about any of this, you see. But an interesting thing began to happen. I started thinking, suppose we had a genuine oil crisis and we really couldn't drive. How would it change church for us? Would we begin knocking on the doors? Aren't you guys Christians? Yeah, well, you know, we can't drive anywhere. Suppose we could get together? Why, yeah. I wonder how that would change the dynamic. It almost makes you want to pray for an oil crisis, you know, when you think about what could go on under a situation like that. But what I believe will happen and does happen when a significant number of people are involved in this kind of setting is that this discipline goes on naturally, because when you have someone praying for you about areas of your life, it becomes a natural form of discipline that prevents the major failures that have to cause drastic discipline. See, I'm convinced. It's kind of like, and this is crass, but forgive me, it's kind of like the elimination actions of the body. It goes on all the time. Regularity. It doesn't happen once a year. You know? And so this kind of setting provides a naturalness that enables the church to have the kind of discipline that I think God intended for us to have. Well, yes. Now, in this particular situation where we are seated facing each other, here are certain things that don't happen that might normally. One, we don't go into neutral because we're participants. No one is out there not being part of the group. You're looking at each other face to face. In fact, this is an interesting little thing I found even in a large group. A certain thing happens when you take an auditorium and bend it around in a semicircle, the chairs, so that people see each other. It changes things. It is a great dynamic. It really improves what's going on when people actually, it's like, I see you over there. I'm not just a participant, but we're part of this, you see. But here, when you complete this circle in a small setting, then you have the participants in gear and not in neutral. That is powerful. Think of it. Just imagine that just half of a congregation got involved in home groups. Do you realize what kind of participation that means? It boggles the mind, really. Now, you may idealize that into thinking, well, you know, half of the people aren't, but they're not. Half the people are active. They're not, you see. But let me tell you something else. As a pastor who knows this, 20-some years of being a pastor, if I could just get half the congregation to pray, think of it. Just think of what would happen if you got just half of the congregation praying out there. Now, one very successful pastor, recognizing this as a problem, you know what he did? And I kidded him. I said, this was brilliant. God had to give it to you. You're not smart enough to think this up. But he said, if there's one thing he thought his people probably did, it was maybe they prayed at their meals. Maybe said grace or something. And he said, would you do one thing? When you pray at your meals, will you also pray for the church? So, there you go. And man, God blessed his church like crazy, because it was the one time that people would pray, and if you just add the church to it, But just think what would happen, folks, if just half the church really, at least once a week, was praying and being prayed for. See? Now, let me also say that typically, when churches decide, we really want to do this, 40% is about the top. It's about the best to do. And I think that's really quite good. And I think the reason is that is so good is because this is America. And we are not small group oriented anymore. We're in big. We want big cars, big houses, big this, biggest team. We're number one. Small is not beautiful. And we want those situations that will give us big show. And a small group may not be as exciting to us as it might be in some places. And as I mentioned, we are so mobile, we really don't, we can go anywhere we want to go. Why limit ourselves to this? And why bother even trying to have one in our neighborhood? And I go to one all the way across town, and that way I can squeeze the big group into the small group because they won't really know me. I'll just go back to my neighborhood and be away, and so forth. So for America, it's a difficult thing for us. In fact, personally, this is just a personal opinion of mine, that kind of structure, that kind of culture that we live in, means that this 12 to 14 probably ought to be squeezed down to 6 to 8 or 7 to 10 for our size. And one of the reasons is because we can't give each other 3 hours a week on a night. Oh man, you don't understand. I'm a busy man. I don't know if I can squeeze another week. If I can give you an hour, okay? Well, then if you got an hour, you need to reduce the size so that everyone can participate. If you can get 3 hours a week, say on one night, then maybe you can have 12 to 14. But I think for the American scene, probably a smaller grouping than that is even better. Here's another problem that I see that I'll just throw this out for you. Sometimes I see churches who say, well, we tried that. And I say, well, how'd you try it? And they say, well, we decided this would be the way we wanted to go, but, we're a really busy church, and I told the people that you can't give up anything you're doing now to do this. You got to add this to what else you're doing. And I said, oh, dear. I said, your people are already overworked. And if there was no place left, you had something going at all times, and there was no place where this could occur, no night dedicated to this, or no real practical way that says we honestly believe this is the way to go, then it will die. Because by your very actions, you were saying this is not the way to go, because our other things that we're doing, our programs, are the real way to go. But I'd get excited if I knew that even 40% of the congregation was doing these things, really getting to know and to be known. Now, here's another thing I discovered. As a pastor, when my congregation started doing this, I didn't have anybody left to counsel. Because the things that I would be dealing with in a counseling situation were being dealt with in the group. And they didn't have to come see me. Or anybody else on the staff, because it was being dealt with. Pastor, I have this problem. Hey, have you talked to your small group about it? No. Do, and then if that doesn't solve it, come and talk to me. And it dealt with it, see? It was just amazing that what God had built the body to be was now occurring in this kind of situation. Oh, well, what should go on then when you have your small group meetings? How do you get one started, for instance? Should we have a small group program? Now you see the oxymoron there. It's like, now wait a minute. You start programming it, and that'll destroy it too. I have discovered that the ones that live grow organically. Now, let me just lay out what I consider to be the best situation. You may have to adjust this because you may not be able to do it organically like this, but it doesn't have to work the way I'm about to tell you. I'll just give you a scene where I think God gave me what I call a textbook situation. Two things happened. First, I had gone to be a pastor, associate pastor in a church, to do this, to do small groups. And also to be a counselor, because I have a degree in that. And so when I arrived, all of the people who felt that they were the really sick ones already had appointments. But they did a most interesting thing, and I never quite found out why they did it. They wanted to help me out by going ahead and getting a small group program going as a program so that when I came in, I could just administrate it. My first official job was to stand up in front of the congregation and say, folks, the small group program is now over. And the congregation went, oh, thank you. Because it had been a program sort of thing. And the pastor said to me, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, just leave me alone, let me try. Okay. So, after counseling for a while, I discovered that I wasn't producing any progress in their lives, the ones who were really sick. And so I decided, well, I'll make a small group out of them. Now, that was a trip. I mean, like a dozen sickies and me. You know? And then the other group that I formed was a group of elders and their wives. So I had two groups. Sometimes I didn't know which one was which. But here's what happened. I was only there like a year. But when I left, there had been some healing go on in that sick group that was awesome. The first one to be deeply healed was me. Because I was struggling with some things that I didn't know what I was going to do. Who could I talk to? And someone 2,000 miles away from there said, why don't you talk to your small group about it? And I thought, no. They're sick. I'm a pastor. They cannot handle me telling them that I struggle. And you know what? The Lord just whispered in my heart and said, Erwin, don't you dare look at my body that way. Who do you think you are? So, I said to them, and I'll tell you exactly what I said, and this will give you an idea. I said, hey, listen, I got to have you guys pray for me. I'm really struggling. Me and the pastor are not getting along. I thought they would be devastated. You know what they said? Oh, we knew that. I said, you did? Oh, yeah, we can tell when you're up there on the platform. And I thought we had it covered so well, you know. And I said, I'm not doing something, I'm doing something, and you've got to help me. You've got to pray for me that we can get our act together. Now, several things happened out of that. Number one, they grew about 100 feet right there because they were praying for me. That, see, I don't always see myself the way others see me. And the fact that I was asking them to pray for me did something for them I had no idea it would ever do. I thought my confession would devastate them, but instead they said, I'm praying for my pastor. You know, they grew like you would not believe. But the thing that was so wonderful is I got healed. God resolved our situation, and it was miraculous. And I'm thinking, oh, Lord, yes. Well, a bunch of other miracles happened in that particular one that I don't even have time to tell you. It would take the rest of the night for me to tell you all the miracles. 2 or 3 of them were suicidal in that group. One had been in and out of a mental hospital. One was convinced they were demon-possessed because everybody had told them that. And one was the now being divorced wife of a psychiatrist whose brain was fried by drugs. And God healed everyone in that group, turned them into profitable, productive, whole individuals in ways that leaves me in absolute awe. And it was just the body being the body. Just the body being the body, see. That nurse got back with her husband. She's now a full-time registered nurse in New York State. Not fried brain anymore, you know. I can spend all night on it, but I must not. Except to say, in that elder group, see, this was the first time they had experienced this, and it was so powerful. One of them said, and I'll never forget this, and it can be threatening to a pastor who isn't secure, that the most dynamic growth of his life was occurring in that small group. Now here's what happened. I left there, but they had now learned the principle, and so they broke up and went out and started, because they each knew how to do it, separate small groups. Those 2 went to 22 within a year's time. That's the organic way, see, because they were catching it. They knew what they were doing. It wasn't like, okay, now the book says, you know. That would be that would be like, I mean, a married couple. You don't relate that way. Let me see. First, I take your hand. You know, I mean, oh, get off it. This is the. And so the most powerful way is when it grows organically. Now, it can grow by other ways. There are individuals who just seem to be able to catch this and run with it, and then that becomes a group that can organically grow into other groups. Because basically, unless you feel like God is wanting you to build a larger group, and you need to have the go-ahead from the body at large to do that, then you need to be careful to keep them this, because they'll grow, you see. Now, in our next session, I'm going to tell you some things to do about that, and what will happen when you have been together for a few months that will surprise you. Because you see, we haven't really tried this much, and we don't know what's down the road. We may think boredom's down the road. We think, oh, I'm going to get tired of this. But there is something down the road with this that is absolutely awesome. It's kind of God's one of His little surprises just waiting for His people when the body starts becoming the body. When everyone gets to know and be known, when everyone's a participant, when everyone prays and gets to be prayed for, and when everyone serves and gets to serve, the body starts becoming the body, and it gets awesome. But there's a little surprise down the road waiting on you that you wouldn't know until you got to that point, because it's like it's a diamond in a clay jar until you get to where the jar is, and you see the sign on it that says "Break me." See what's inside. You don't know that this is even coming up, but I'll clue you in so you'll know. It'll still be a surprise, even though you know it's coming, because you never quite know which direction the Holy Spirit will take it. But hopefully this gives you some idea of what's happening, what was happening, for instance, with that early church and the power that they had and the fellowship that they had that would cause them to be able to grow into the neighborhoods they grew into that we have lost track of. We go into neighborhoods now with evangelistic programs, don't we? Because that's the typical theater church kind of thing. We will go in with we got to figure out ways to get in the neighborhood, when really that's the best way in the world to get into a given neighborhood. Everywhere there are people, there will be homes, you see. And the church can always grow that way. Okay, we'll take up more next time we get together. But thank you very, very much for your time. I appreciate it. God bless you.